course, to everybody who helped make our services today special and beautiful. Jeff Kirsch led off, Mark Sussman did our davening, Rabbi Pachter read Torah, Gordy Veras did Haftorah. Jeff Kirsch also was our floor captain. Gordy Veras and Chuck Veras were our Gabbis. Thank you, everybody. So yesterday I began telling a story of my grandfather of blessed memory, Herman Cantor, and the last Seder that I attended with him in 1997. I told how throughout the Seder, at what appeared to be at relatively random times, my grandfather declared it was time to sing Dayenu, and how we may have attributed the almost endless renditions of Dayenu to his older age and confusion, but there could be a different understanding, one that allows us to see that there's something much deeper in the observance of the Seder. In that story, we began to understand what it meant to fulfill the obligation of the Seder, and how at the end of the Seder, we declare Chasel Sidur Pesach Kehilchato V'Kol Mishpachto V'Chuchato. We declare the Pesach Seder or service is finished according to its ways and laws. I explained that this is the only mitzvah in all of Judaism where we make a declaration, hey, I did it. Not only did I do it, but I did it right. And I asked the question, how do we really know that we fulfilled the obligations of the Seder? How do we know that we don't need to recite another round of Dayenu with my grandfather? So yesterday I gave the first answer, and I said that, as the Haggadah says, Chayav Adam lir'ot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatza miMitzrayim, that each one of us must see themselves as though they came out of Egypt. But there's another answer that's also in the Haggadah that requires us to pay attention, or we might, when you finish with Seder, with services here, have to go home and do another Seder. So pay attention. Rabban Gamliel in the Haggadah declares, Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu ba'Pesach lo yatzeh yedei chovato. Any person who doesn't declare these three things, who doesn't say these three things, has not fulfilled their obligation of the Pesach Seder. The Pesach, the matzah, and the maror. The Pesach is the Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice. I don't know what Paschal is, right? But the Passover sacrifice. The matzah is the matzah, and the maror is the bitter herbs. These three symbols of the Seder are so central that were we to neglect to mention them, we'd have to go back and do the whole Seder again. There are many interpretations of these symbols and why Rabban Gamliel chose them, but I believe at the end of the day, these three get at the heart of the Seder and get at the heart of what it means to be a Jew. And so, today as we prepare to say Yizkor, I want to look at these three symbols. The maror is a bitter herb, reminding us of the bitterness of the suffering of our ancestors in Egyptian bondage. But the Passover Seder, like our own family stories, begins well before we actually begin to read it in the Haggadah. The first two chapters of the book of Exodus of Shemot take Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, on a journey, descent, transitioning within only one short verse from a people being fruitful and abundant and thriving to a strong new king emerging, determined to quash the body and crush the spirit of our ancestors. The suffering of our ancestors lasts for generations, but the turning point comes at the end of chapter 2 when the children of Israel groaned out because of the severity of their work and cried out to God. And God heard them and remembered the covenant. Ramban Nachmanides, the medieval commentator, says that this awakened the divine attribute of mercy. It wasn't until they actually cried out to God that God summoned Moses to redeem the Jewish people. We were created in the image of God, and we are tasked with imitating God's actions as much as possible. And so God's mercy was awakened. Just as God clothed the naked, we must realize there are people without clothing and clothe the naked. Just as God cares for the outcast and downtrodden, we must hear the cry of those who are outcast. The moral message is clear. God who pays attention to human suffering is our God, and our God will not and cannot tolerate a world of human pain. When you tasted the maror, the pure, bitter, undiluted horseradish, no, I'm not talking about the stuff with the beets and the sugar and all that stuff, just the pure chunk of horseradish root. Did you swallow it quickly and wash it down, or did you let it burn in your mouth? Depending on the year, and some roots are stronger than others, did it bring tears to your eyes? As Rav Kook wrote, the pain of others must shake the very soul of the righteous. As a group of righteous, were your souls shaken? We would do well to remember that in our time, we who expect and demand that the world sees our pain as the Jewish people must open our hearts to see the pain of others as well. But today, as we prepare to say Yizkor, I ask you to think about the times when you were hurt and cried out. The times you fell down and got a boo-boo, a big one or a little one. The times your hearts were broken, who was there to pick you up? Who was there to give you a kiss to make it better, or at least hold your hand to get through those crises of your life that are no longer here with us, that we can remember? The second symbol is the matzah. The matzah itself is said to be both the bread of affliction and the bread of redemption. So how can it be two contradictory things at one time? Because the reality of this world is just that things can contradict and exist as two equal truths. We like to see the world as black and white, but it's not. It's filled with many colors and shades and gradations. Matzah is baked with only the poorest of ingredients, flour and water. And it's so basic because that's all our ancestors had. It's the bread of affliction because it represents a food that could sustain us at the most basic level. But it's also the bread of redemption because when we were hungry in the desert, running away from Pharaoh, and our stomachs were growling, the matzah filled us, gave us energy, and allowed us to continue on. It redeemed us and helped us find redemption. Like matzah, I ask you to think, who was there to feed you when you were hungry? What did they feed you? How did they nourish you? Physically, spiritually. What were the foods that they made for you? Yet the most powerful symbol that Rabban Gamliel talks about is the Pesach, the shank bone. You see, it's the most powerful one, yet we don't touch it. When we talk about the matzah, we raise it up at the Seder. When we talk about the maror, we raise it up. But we don't touch the shank bone, we just point. Yet it's the most powerful. On the night of the 10th plague, the children of Israel were instructed to slaughter an animal as a Passover sacrifice and paint the blood onto the lintel and the two doorposts. So that, why? The angel of death would pass over. The angel of death did not need the blood on the doorposts to know who was a Jew and who was not. God did not need that blood on the doorpost to know. Why did the Jews have to do this? Why? In a place where they are feared. They live in fear. They're utterly terrified. They've witnessed 9 plagues that have wreaked havoc on Egypt. They've been oppressed and whipped and beat for 400 years. They're battered and they're broken. But here's where they take a step. And they declare that we will not be passive recipients of divine salvation, but we will take action to help bring about our own redemption. They became active participants in their own redemption story. This was the moment they affirmed their own agency as an outward demonstration of their faith in a different kind of future. Their refusal to accede to Pharaoh's demands, their insistence that they needed and deserved something better in this world. In the eyes of our rabbis, this was the one act that signified their transition from passivity to agency, from degradation to covenant. The Passover sacrifice, the paschal lamb, the shank bone on our Seder plate represents the actions that we must take to bring the world we want to see. But I want to ask you, those that you remember today, what did they teach you to do? What actions did they take to make a difference in the world? I've talked about how my parents, who are still alive, thank God, but my parents took beautiful actions and took us to protest for Soviet Jews. And my parents hosted Israel events in our living room. And my parents did that. And my grandparents of blessed memory took in endless numbers of people, college students who had nowhere to go, filled Seder tables. And I've heard the stories over and over again of how many people they welcomed and how much they did. And my great-grandmother, Fanny Zlavovsky, who worked to smuggle Jews and others across the El Paso, Texas border, bringing them in when the United States wouldn't allow Jews in. Standing up and taking a stand to make a difference. How can we take what our ancestors left us and incorporate it into our lives? That's the message of the Paschal lamb on our Seder plate, because it represents, even though it's the one thing we don't lift up, it's the one thing that we don't actually eat, unless you're Sfard, and then you can eat lamb on the first night of Passover. I don't know if you know that or not. But even though we don't touch it, it represents the action that we must take to bring about redemption. As we prepare to recite Yizkor, and tonight end the Passover holiday, I ask you to think about these two questions. How did others, those who we remember through Yizkor, bring healing, food, and redemption to me? How did they care for me, teach me, and inspire me to be a better person? And did I, question number 2, did I fulfill the obligations of the Passover Seder by seeing myself as having gone from oppression to redemption to such a degree that it reignited a genuine sense of empathy and caring, such that I'm inspired to bring redemption and light to others in the year to come? Chag Sameach.